So I'm going to pause there, because I know we've got other folks, and I'm assuming we'll have questions later.
So we'll do questions at the end. Dr. Helen Middleton from Technology School of Management in Toronto, she actually is in Brazil, training in Ife. We were trying to get her conference in the video conference, and unfortunately we haven't been able to do that. So we have effectively a webinar. So she's pre-recorded the talk, and we're going to have her slides for you. And so Sean's just going to get her here.
Hello. I'm really disappointed that I wasn't able to join you in person and that we weren't able to even get a live video conference going. So these are pre-recorded comments, and I apologize in advance if they don't line up exactly with what other panelists have said. I am Catherine Middleton. I would like to speak today about the big picture of broadband impact assessment. I'm going to go on to my first slide and look at three key questions. So the 3 points that I wanted to speak about on this panel are the context for understanding the impact of broadband. I wanted to discuss what we really mean by broadband, and I wanted to comment on data, the availability of data to help us understand what people are doing, what they have available to them, and how that impacts the overall effectiveness and benefit and value that we get from broadband. Moving on to slide number 2, just to start with some context for Canada. I think one of the questions that we perhaps don't understand fully is the sort of impact we're looking for. So there's been a volume of research looking at economic impact of broadband, and I expect that this has been discussed already on the panel. The research tells us that, in general, that implementing broadband networks is a good thing. There's lots of evidence that access to broadband improves all sorts of aspects of people's quality of life. It can provide better access to healthcare, to educational information, and a whole lot of other things. But in the Canadian context, we don't really have an overall broad vision of how we as Canadians see broadband contributing to our society. In 2010, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the federal government launched a consultation on a digital economy strategy. That's the picture on the left of this slide. We're still waiting for the outcomes of this consultation. The current industry minister had promised that we would see a digital economy strategy by the end of this year. It's getting pretty close to the end of the year, and it hasn't been released yet. In the interim, really all we do have in terms of any policy directive or any statement around the type of broadband that should be available to Canadians is in the CRTC policy that was implemented or announced in 2011. This is the graphic on the right-hand side of the slide, in which the CRTC, the Commission, said that Canadians by 2015 should have access to real speeds, actual speeds, not just advertised speeds, broadband speeds of 5 megabits per second downstream and 1 megabit per second upstream. So this is really all that we have in Canada as our target or our statement around what we want broadband to be. If we move on to the next slide, we are looking at some of the vision, some of the targets elsewhere around the world. And we see pretty quickly that they are much more ambitious and than in Canada, and there are very clear, concrete plans in place for other countries to achieve their targets. So if we start in the top left and look at Europe, Digital Agenda for Europe, so this is something that was first published in 2010, looking at download rates of 30 megabits per second rather than 5 by 2020 across the EU, with an expectation, or in fact a goal, that 50% of European households will not only have access to, but will subscribe to internet connections that are faster than 100 megabits per second by 2020. In the US, National Broadband Plan, it was commissioned by Congress, and it has as its #1 goal 1 million US households having affordable access to download speeds, actual speeds of 100 megabits per second, and upload speeds of 50 megabits per second. So compare this to the 5.1 goal or target that we have in Canada. Additionally, by 2015, the milestone is that, as it shows here, 100 million homes will have access to a 50 megabit per second connection. If we go to Australia as another example, the Australian government, if we look at the graphic there, first point to note is that they have a Department of Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy. In Canada, in comparison, our broadband planning is under Industry Canada and shared in part the regulatory aspects of it with the CRTC. Australia has a very clear vision. There's a National Digital Economy Strategy, a document in place that lays out how to achieve this vision. There are very clear specific goals, and there is an infrastructure plan that goes along with this. A national broadband network, fiber to the home, is being built to serve 93% of Australian households with initial speeds of 100 megabits per second. So this gives us three different examples in three different places of a context that provides a way for us to compare what we're doing in Canada. So if we're looking at the impact of broadband in Canada, we need to understand that what we are rolling out is not just to be compared for as against having no broadband at all, but we need to compare ourselves against what's happening in other countries to understand the overall international competitiveness of Canada's broadband infrastructure. Just moving on to slide 4. If you were to go to the ITU website, they do have a list of broadband policies worldwide, and they do indicate that Canada has a national policy. But if you click through the link, it takes you to the 2009 Broadband Canada program, which was a specific targeted program. It was a stimulus package program, investing $200 million to extend broadband to rural Canadians. And I suspect that either that has been or will be discussed further at this conference. Moving on to the next slide, slide 5, question of what is broadband. So clearly speed is important, and there were, in early days, the discussions were really very much around what speeds are there. In Canada, we're still looking at very low speeds in comparison to what the international targets are, as we just seen on the previous slide. So the 5 megabits per second that will be required by the CRTC by 2015 is very slow in comparison to what is being attempted to be delivered in other countries. It's also important to recognize that broadband can do more than internet. It can deliver more than the basic, what we might call the commercial internet service. We can develop and deliver all kinds of services sitting on top of that broadband connection that don't actually run over the internet. This is something that is happening in part through the US Ignite program. It's piloting and trialing some of these, and I believe that you'll learn more about that tomorrow. There are also many different business models for delivering broadband. The pictures here are ones that I took in the UK in October. The one on the left-hand side, the guy who's on the second in, not on the back but beside him, this is his backyard, and this is the barn project. Again, there'll be a description of this tomorrow. But this project is local citizens building a gigabit fiber network. In this instance, this is a man helping to put a trench and put a conduit into place so he can have fiber to his home that will offer a gigabit per second service. And this is a network that is owned and operated by the community. So that's quite a different model than what we might get if we're buying our services from a commercial ISP. Moving on to slide 6, another really important thing to help us in assessing impact of broadband is the data that are available to us. So questions that we need to look at, or questions that we want to address, are how is Canada doing in terms of supplying broadband, making it available, and also in terms of understanding how our citizens are using it. Some of the measures that I believe Kathy Wood spoke about around what are individuals actually doing and how do they actually benefit. We do have data, but we certainly don't have as much or as easily accessible data as we might have. If we look at the picture of the Canadian Internet Use Survey, a week and a bit ago, the 2009 survey data was released. And if you look at this description here, it comes on a CD-ROM, so you can't just download it, and you need to use SAS or SPSS to analyze this data. So it's certainly not easily accessible. The spreadsheet screenshot at the bottom are data that I believe Olena spoke about on broadband supply. But again, if you look at that data and if you try to match up supply with the data in the Canadian Internet Use Survey about demand, it's very, very difficult to do. And it's not something that many of us have the skills to do, the time, and we just simply don't have the data available to us really in useful forms. A couple of comparisons, if we look at the US, again, 2008 Act of Congress requires certain data to be collected and to be made publicly available. And moving on to slide 8, if we look at the UK, we see quarterly internet access data. I have updated very quickly, so quarter 3, 2013 is already available, and there's an Excel file right on the website. You can download it, analyze it immediately. Right, going on to the final slide, and this has been a quick run through these points. What I want to leave you with really is in thinking about broadband impact assessment, I do believe there are 3 key points that we need to take into consideration. The first is the benchmarks. So we can certainly do impact analysis that looks at the specifics of the benefits we're getting from whatever network we've built. But we need to look at that in context. So we need to understand not only what are we getting from the network we've built, but what other types of networks are there out there, and what sorts of benefits are they delivering, and are we in a position to achieve or realize those benefits with the infrastructure that we have in place. That's already picking up on the second point, that there really are many, many ways of delivering broadband, and we need to be cognizant of these as we assess the impact. Finally, we need to understand what's happening, and there's really a need for much better, much more available data that's collected more quickly and made available to us in much easier to use formats. So to conclude, I would say that we still have a lot to do in Canada to understand the tools and the mechanisms we need to assess the impact of broadband. Thanks very much.